Hey guys, I've got Eclipse running and I'll provide some links to how to set it up in the description. Alright, let's start off the top. Public class main class. Now, a class stores all of the code in the inside. Think of it as something that encapsulates all of your code. Another thing you'll notice is that the file it is stored in is called mainclass.java, which has the same name as the class name. Notice the brackets used to set off the inside code. Next, we'll move on to public static void main string args. When you press the run button, this is where the code execution will start. Whatever is inside here will get run. Notice again the brackets used to separate this off. Next, we'll move on to system.out.println with the brackets. Basically, this is a command to print out anything that is between the brackets. If I run this here, you'll see that this gets printed out in the console. Notice that it's ended with a semicolon, which is a very important thing in Java. Each command is ended with a semicolon. This is called, the double quotes used here are used to denote strings or text. Which brings us to variables. If we ever want to store data, we have to create variables. Creating a variable is simple. All we do is first specify the data type, which represents what type of data it will be, followed by the variable name. For example, int and integer will store a number. A non-decimal number, that is. And int stands for a data type of an integer. We can assign it a value like this, or we can assign it on the same line like this. We can create a variable to represent text too. For example, to store this text, we can use a variable data type called a string text and set it equal to this. Now we can replace whatever is in between the brackets with a variable. And now if you hit run, the same thing gets printed out. Now what if you want to repeat this statement 5 times? What if you want to print out this statement 5 or 10 times? Well, we can copy and paste the code many times like this, or we can use something else called loops. For example, this is a for loop. We create a variable I, we set it to 0, we set a condition called I less than 5, and we increment I each time. I++ means we'll add 1 to I each time the code is run. Now if we do this, and if we run this, we'll see that it goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. In fact, we can combine 2 variables inside the brackets like this. And if we print this out, now we can also add a space in between. We can combine a variable and a non-variable. And now if we run this, now there is another loop called a while loop. However, in here we have to declare the variable on the outside. Notice the brackets and the semicolons used. Now here in the while loop, it is important to increment it right here. If you do not, it'll end up in an infinite loop that will never finish. Now if you hit run, the same functionality as the for loop is achieved. Another important concept is the use of booleans. Booleans are variables, but they store only 2 values, true or false, like this, or it can be false. Now booleans are used in decision making. Try to interpret this statement. Again, notice the brackets used. Now, do you think this statement will get run? If we press the run button, it doesn't appear. That's because this boolean is set to false, and what this statement basically does is if whatever is in between the brackets is true, this statement will get run. If we set this to true, and now we press run, you'll notice that the statement gets printed out. We can also replace this with non-variables like 7 is greater than 5. And we can combine and match like this. 7 is greater than 5 and 10 is greater than 2. This statement means that and, both of these must be true. Another statement is or. which basically means only one of them has to be true. So for this can be false, and it'll still get run. Another one is not. If 5 not equal to 10, it'll get run. Because 5 is not equal to 10, so this will get run. And finally, we can straight out compare two values, like 10. We have to use two equal sign in order to not confuse it with the assignment operator. And if we do that, it'll get run. Now we can extend an if statement by using something called an else statement. What this will do is if the if statement does not get run, this will get called. So if, for example, if I set this to false by saying 10 is not equal to 10, which is a false statement, this will get called, not this. As this doesn't get run, the else statement gets run. We can also extend this further by using an else if statement, like this. Else if 10 is greater than 5. And now if we test this out, you'll notice that this gets called. Notice that out of these three statements, only one will ever get called. The yellow underlining here is just by Eclipse to show that this code won't get run. It's not that important. We can also use multiple else ifs. It's not restricted to one else if. And we can keep doing this many times as needed. Now we can create very basic programs with this, but let's spice it up a little bit. We can use a data type called a double to store decimal numbers, like this. There's also the float, which is also used to store decimal numbers, but it can store a maximum of fewer decimal numbers. And notice the red line. For floats, we have to put an F at the end to indicate it's a float and not a double. Finally, there are methods which are best demonstrated by practice. For example, like this public static void main, I can create something called public static void, and like variables, I can give it any name, so I'll just call it do something. And what I can do is put all of this inside here, and I can call do something. And now, inside public static void main, all I have is this line, and the rest of it is inside here. But if I press run, we'll get the same result. So basically, methods just store portions of the code based on similar things. For example, this can just be part of the if statement. I can remove all of this and transfer it up here. Just tab this. And you'll notice the same thing happens. So we can create many methods, like we can create many variables. They're basically used to put similar code in one container. Note we can create variables up here, but they have to be public static. And we can assign it inside here. Or we can assign it up there too. Like so. The difference in creating a variable up here and creating a variable in here is that a variable in here can only be accessed inside here. We can't use this variable inside public static void main. However, we can use this variable in both of them because it's declared up here. Well, that's it for the basics of Java. In the next video, we'll cover a bit more intermediate topics. In the meanwhile, you guys can practice these skills, and if you guys got any questions, you can post them in the comments. See you guys in the next video.